The morning sun cast a golden glow over London as thousands of people lined the streets, their faces filled with anticipation. Today was not just any ordinary day in the history of the British monarchy. It was a day that would be remembered for generations to come. The air buzzed with excitement as cameras from around the world pointed toward the grand procession route, waiting to capture every precious moment of this historic occasion. Inside Kensington Palace, the Wales family prepared for what would become one of the most photographed moments in recent royal history. Princess Kate stood before an elegant mirror, her reflection showing a woman who had grown from a nervous young bride into a confident future queen. Her stylist made final adjustments to her outfit, ensuring every detail was absolutely perfect. The pressure of the moment was immense, but Kate had learned over the years how to carry herself with grace under the watchful eyes of millions. Prince William paced nearby, checking his watch repeatedly. As second in line to the throne, he understood the weight of this day more than most. His father was about to be crowned, and the entire family needed to present a united front. But more than the formality and tradition, William was concerned about his children. Prince George, at 10 years old, was old enough to understand the significance of the day, but that knowledge brought its own pressures. Princess Charlotte, 8, had been practicing her curtsy for weeks, determined to get it just right. And little Prince Louis, at 5 years old, remained blissfully unaware of how much the world would be watching his every move. The children's nanny helped them get dressed in their specially designed outfits. George looked remarkably grown up in his formal attire, though his nervous energy was evident in the way he kept adjusting his collar. Charlotte twirled in front of the mirror, admiring how her dress swirled around her. She had inherited her mother's love for fashion and understood, even at her young age, that people would be talking about what she wore today. Louis, on the other hand, seemed more interested in playing with a toy soldier he had somehow smuggled into the dressing room. Kate knelt down to speak with her youngest son, her maternal instincts taking over despite the formal nature of the day. She explained gently that today was very important for Grandpa, and everyone needed to be on their best behavior. Louis nodded solemnly, though his mischievous eyes suggested he might have other plans. Kate exchanged a knowing look with William. They both remembered Louis's memorable antics during the late Queen's Platinum Jubilee, when his animated facial expressions had stolen the show and became internet sensations. As the family gathered in the palace drawing room for final preparations, William pulled his eldest son aside. Father and son stood together, and for a moment, the weight of their future roles hung in the air between them. William spoke quietly to George, sharing wisdom about duty, family, and the responsibility that came with their positions. George listened intently, his young face serious beyond his years. He was being prepared not just for today's ceremony, but for a lifetime of service that stretched far into the future. The palace staff moved with practiced efficiency, coordinating with security teams and protocol officers. Every minute was planned down to the second. The route to Westminster Abbey had been secured, with thousands of police officers and security personnel ensuring the safety of the royal family and the hundreds of thousands of spectators who had traveled from across the globe to witness this historic moment. Some had camped out for days, braving cold nights and rain, just to catch a glimpse of the royal family. Kate took one final look in the mirror and saw not just her reflection, but the reflection of a woman who had been thrust into the spotlight years ago and had emerged stronger for it. She thought back to her wedding day, when she had walked down the aisle of the same Westminster Abbey nervous but determined. Now she was returning as the Princess of Wales, with 3 children who represented the future of the monarchy. The transformation had been remarkable, though not always easy. The head of security knocked on the door, signaling it was time to leave. William straightened his jacket and took a deep breath. Kate gathered the children around her, doing a final check of their appearance. Charlotte's hair ribbon needed a small adjustment, and Louis's shirt had somehow become partially untucked. After these quick fixes, the family was ready. They walked together toward the palace entrance where their official car waited, its polish gleaming in the morning light. Outside the palace gates, the crowd's excitement had reached a fever pitch. News helicopters circled overhead, their cameras capturing aerial shots of the gathering crowds. Television commentators spoke in reverent tones about the historical significance of the day, comparing it to coronations past and speculating about what this ceremony might reveal about the future of the British monarchy. Social media platforms exploded with activity as people around the world tuned in to watch. The Wales family's car pulled up to the palace entrance. Palace footmen stood at attention, ready to assist. William stepped out first, his posture straight and his expression composed. He turned to help Kate emerge from the vehicle, and as she stepped out, cameras flashed like a lightning storm. Her outfit was immediately the subject of commentary from fashion experts and royal watchers who had been waiting months to see what she would wear for this momentous occasion. Then came the children, and the crowd's excitement grew even louder. George emerged with the dignity expected of a future king, though his youth was still evident in the slight nervousness of his movements. Charlotte followed, remembering to smile and wave just as she had been taught, and then Louis appeared, his little face breaking into a wide grin as he waved enthusiastically at the cheering crowd. Despite all the rehearsals and instructions, he remained wonderfully, authentically himself. The family paused for a moment at the palace steps, allowing the assembled photographers to capture the image that would grace front pages around the world the next morning. William placed a protective hand on George's shoulder. Kate held Louis's hand firmly, knowing her youngest son's tendency to wander at the most inopportune moments. Charlotte stood perfectly poised, her posture mimicking her mother's grace. Together, they presented the image of a modern royal family, balancing tradition with contemporary warmth and accessibility that the public had come to love. The royal convoy began its journey through the streets of London, moving at a stately pace that allowed the massive crowds to see the family clearly. Inside the car, the atmosphere was a mixture of formal composure and family warmth. Kate squeezed William's hand briefly, a private moment of connection amid the public spectacle. The children pressed their faces to the windows, amazed by the sea of people waving flags and holding up phones to capture their own memories of this historic day. George sat quietly, absorbing everything around him with the seriousness of someone who understood his place in history. He had been briefed extensively about what to expect, but nothing could fully prepare a young boy for the reality of seeing hundreds of thousands of people gathered because of his family. His grandmother, the late Queen Elizabeth, had spoken to him before she passed away about the responsibilities that would one day be his. Those conversations weighed on his young mind today as he watched the crowds. Charlotte, meanwhile, kept a running commentary in a whisper to her mother, pointing out interesting signs people held and particularly beautiful flower arrangements along the route. She had her mother's eye for detail and a natural charm that seemed effortless. Kate whispered back, encouraging her daughter's observations while gently reminding her to wave at the people who had waited so long to see them. Charlotte obliged, her small hand moving in the practiced royal wave that looked so natural it was hard to believe she was only 8 years old. Louis, as expected, provided the unpredictable element that made the family so relatable to ordinary people around the world. He made faces at children in the crowd, causing delighted laughter wherever he looked. At one point, he pressed both hands against the car window and made a silly expression that would later become a viral moment on social media. Kate gently corrected him, but even she couldn't suppress a small smile at her son's irrepressible personality. William shook his head with fond exasperation, recognizing his youngest son's determination to do things his own way. The route to Westminster Abbey took them past some of London's most iconic landmarks. Buckingham Palace stood majestically behind them as they made their way toward the historic church where British monarchs had been crowned for centuries. The architecture told the story of a nation, from ancient stone buildings that had witnessed generations of history to modern structures that represented Britain's place in the contemporary world. It was a visual reminder that the monarchy existed in a constant balance between honoring tradition and remaining relevant to modern society. Security personnel maintained constant vigilance throughout the journey, their eyes scanning rooftops and crowds for any potential threats. But the mood among the spectators was overwhelmingly joyful and celebratory. People of all ages from different backgrounds and countries had come together to witness this moment of pageantry and tradition. British flags waved alongside flags from Commonwealth nations and beyond, creating a colorful tapestry that stretched as far as the eye could see. As they approached Westminster Abbey, the architecture of the ancient church came into view, its Gothic spires reaching toward the sky. The building had stood for nearly 1,000 years, witnessing coronations, royal weddings, and state funerals. Today, it would once again serve as the stage for a ceremony that connected present-day Britain with its medieval past. The symbolism was not lost on William, who had studied British history extensively and understood that he was not just participating in a family event, but in a ritual that defined the nation's identity. The car slowed as they reached the Abbey entrance, where military personnel stood in perfect formation, their ceremonial uniforms a spectacular display of color and precision. The crowds here were even denser, with distinguished guests from around the world making their way into the church. World leaders, representatives from Commonwealth nations, members of European royal families, and countless other dignitaries had traveled to London for this occasion. It was not just a British event, but a global one that commanded attention across continents. Kate took a deep breath as the car came to a complete stop. She smoothed down her outfit one more time and gave each of her children a final encouraging look. William stepped out first, and immediately the noise from the crowd intensified. He turned to help Kate exit the vehicle, and as she emerged, the sunlight caught her outfit in a way that made her seem almost luminous. The designers who had worked on her ensemble had succeeded beyond their wildest hopes in creating something that honored tradition while making a contemporary statement. George followed his parents, his movements careful and measured. He had been practicing how to carry himself with dignity, and all those rehearsals were evident in the way he descended from the car and stood beside his father. The resemblance between father and son was striking, not just in their physical features but in the way they held themselves with quiet confidence, despite the enormous attention focused upon them. Charlotte stepped out next, and her grace drew admiring comments from royal watchers. She had been nervous during rehearsals, worried about tripping on the steps or forgetting to smile, but now that the moment had arrived, she moved with natural poise. Her dress caught the breeze slightly, and she instinctively placed a hand on it in a gesture that mirrored something her mother might do. The photographers capturing every moment knew they were witnessing the emergence of a future senior royal who would someday take her own place in public life. Then came Louis, and the crowd's reaction shifted to something warmer and more affectionate. The young prince had captured hearts with his unfiltered reactions at previous royal events, and people were eager to see what he might do today. He emerged from the car and immediately looked around with wide eyes, taking in the grandeur of Westminster Abbey and the massive crowd. For a moment he seemed overwhelmed, and Kate quickly moved to his side, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. The family stood together at the base of the Abbey steps, presenting a united front before beginning their ascent. William and Kate exchanged a brief glance that communicated volumes without words. They were partners in this journey, supporting each other through the challenges of royal life while trying to give their children as normal an upbringing as possible under extraordinary circumstances. Today tested that balance more than ever, as their children performed on one of the world's biggest stages. Protocol officers discreetly signaled that it was time to enter the Abbey. The family began their walk up the steps, their movements synchronized and purposeful. Inside, they would find a church filled with dignitaries and guests all waiting for the ceremony to begin. The organ music drifted out through the open doors, a majestic sound that added to the solemnity of the moment. Each step brought them closer to their seats and to their roles in the historic ceremony about to unfold. The interior of Westminster Abbey took their breath away, even though they had all been inside the historic church before. Today, however, it had been transformed into something extraordinary. Flowers adorned every available surface, their scents mingling with the ancient smell of stone and history. The lighting had been carefully arranged to highlight the Abbey's magnificent architecture, while ensuring that every guest could see clearly. Television cameras were positioned strategically, ready to broadcast this moment to an estimated 2 billion viewers worldwide. As the Wales family processed down the aisle, every head turned to watch them. Kate kept her eyes forward, but she was acutely aware of the scrutiny from hundreds of pairs of eyes. Years of experience had taught her how to move gracefully while being photographed from every angle, but the presence of her children added an extra layer of concern. She wanted them to shine, to represent their generation of royals with dignity while still being allowed to be children. George walked beside his father, trying to match William's stride and bearing. The young prince had been given a special role in the ceremony, one that reflected his position as second in line to the throne after his father. The responsibility weighed heavily on his young shoulders, but he was determined not to disappoint his family or the nation watching. His great-grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, had once told him that duty was a privilege, not a burden, and he repeated those words to himself as he walked. Charlotte held her mother's hand, her eyes wide as she took in the magnificent scene. The abbey was filled with people wearing elaborate outfits, military uniforms decorated with medals and formal dress that represented cultures from around the world. She recognized some faces from photographs she had seen during her history lessons, world leaders whose names she had learned to pronounce carefully. The weight of the occasion began to settle on her, and she gripped her mother's hand a little tighter. Louis, walking between his siblings, seemed less overawed and more curious. His head swiveled from side to side as he tried to take everything in at once. The colorful military uniforms particularly caught his attention, and Kate had to gently guide him forward when he seemed inclined to stop and stare. Despite the solemnity of the occasion, several guests couldn't help but smile at the young prince's obvious fascination with his surroundings. His authenticity provided a refreshing contrast to the carefully choreographed formality of the event. The family reached their designated seats in the front section of the abbey, positioned where they would have a clear view of the ceremony, while also being visible to the cameras broadcasting the event worldwide. William helped George settle into his seat, whispering last-minute reminders about posture and when to stand or sit during different parts of the ceremony. Kate arranged Charlotte and Louis on either side of her, knowing that she would need to keep Louis engaged throughout the lengthy ceremony. The abbey gradually filled with the remaining guests. Each arrival announced by a protocol officer. Former prime ministers took their seats alongside current government ministers. Supreme Court justices sat near religious leaders from various faiths. The gathering represented not just British society, but the global community, all coming together to witness the continuation of a tradition that stretched back more than 1,000 years. The diversity of the attendees reflected how much the monarchy had evolved to represent a multicultural Britain and Commonwealth music, filled the ancient space as the ceremony's official beginning drew near. The choir's voices soared to the vaulted ceiling, their harmonies perfected through weeks of intensive rehearsal. Louis's eyes grew wide at the sound, and for a moment he forgot to fidget as he listened to the beautiful music. Kate noticed his rapt attention and felt a surge of maternal pride. Even her most energetic child could appreciate moments of beauty and grandeur when they touched his heart. The archbishop and other clergy members took their positions, their ceremonial robes adding to the visual splendor of the occasion. These religious figures would guide the ceremony, performing rituals that had been refined over centuries to represent the spiritual dimension of monarchy. The coronation was not just a political event but a sacred one, with the monarch being anointed and blessed in a ceremony that emphasized service to God and country. George watched everything with intense concentration, knowing that someday he might sit where his grandfather would soon sit. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying for a boy who sometimes just wanted to play football with his friends. But his parents had taught him that privilege came with responsibility, and he was learning to accept both. He glanced at his father, who gave him an encouraging nod, and George felt some of his tension ease. A hush fell over the abbey as the moment arrived for the main procession to begin. Trumpets sounded, their bright notes cutting through the air with ceremonial precision. Everyone in the abbey stood, their movements creating a rustling sound that quickly faded into expectant silence. The television cameras zoomed in, ready to capture every moment of what would be one of the most watched events in broadcasting history. King Charles entered the abbey, and the congregation erupted in carefully controlled applause. He moved slowly down the aisle, his expression serious but peaceful. This was the moment he had been prepared for his entire life, and now it had finally arrived. Behind him came other members of the royal family, each playing their part in the elaborate ceremony. The procession was a carefully choreographed display of hierarchy and tradition, each person's position reflecting their place in the royal structure. William felt a complex mix of emotions as he watched his father process toward the coronation chair. Pride, certainly, but also a sense of the passage of time and the inevitability of change. His father had waited decades for this moment, serving as Prince of Wales longer than anyone in British history. Now William himself held that title, with all its associated responsibilities and expectations. He squeezed Kate's hand briefly, grateful for her steady presence beside him. The ceremony began with ancient words spoken in solemn tones. The Archbishop addressed the congregation, explaining the significance of what they were about to witness. His words connected the present moment with centuries of tradition, reminding everyone that they were participants in a living history that would continue long after they were gone. The coronation was not just about one man becoming king, but about the continuity of an institution that had guided Britain through countless challenges and changes. Charlotte watched with fascination as various religious and ceremonial objects were presented to her grandfather. Each item had its own significance and history, representing different aspects of royal authority and responsibility. She had learned about some of these objects in her history lessons, but seeing them in person made them suddenly real and meaningful. Her teacher had been right when she said that history was not just about the past, but about understanding the present and preparing for the future. Louis began to fidget as the ceremony continued, finding it difficult to sit still through the lengthy proceedings. Kate quietly produced a small book she had hidden in her bag, one of Louis's favorites, and let him look at the pictures while keeping the book low so as not to disturb others. It was a practical solution that allowed Louis to remain relatively calm while the ceremony progressed. Several nearby guests noticed and smiled with understanding, having been parents themselves. The ceremony reached its most sacred moment, when King Charles was anointed with holy oil, a ritual hidden from cameras by a specially designed screen. This ancient tradition, dating back to biblical times, represented the spiritual dimension of kingship and the monarch's commitment to serve under divine guidance. Even though the congregation could not see what was happening behind the screen, the solemnity of the moment was palpable throughout the abbey. A profound silence fell over the gathering, broken only by the Archbishop's prayers. George understood the significance of this moment from his studies. His tutor had explained that the anointing was considered the most important part of the coronation, more significant even than the placing of the crown. It represented a covenant between the monarch and a higher power, acknowledging that earthly authority came with spiritual responsibility. As he sat there, George wondered what it would feel like when his own turn came decades in the future. The thought made him feel both small and somehow connected to something much larger than himself. When the screen was removed, King Charles was dressed in ceremonial robes of stunning magnificence. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, with gold thread embroidery that caught the light and seemed to glow. These garments had been made specifically for this occasion, incorporating symbols that represented not just Britain, but the entire Commonwealth. The care taken in every detail reminded everyone present that this was not merely a spectacle, but a ceremony rich with meaning and symbolism accumulated over centuries. The moment arrived for the actual crowning. The St. Edward's crown, the centerpiece of the crown jewels, was lifted high for all to see before being placed upon King Charles's head. The crown, made of solid gold and encrusted with precious stones, weighed nearly 5 pounds. William watched his father receive the crown and felt the weight of his own future pressing upon him. That crown, or one like it, would one day rest on his own head, and then on George's. The continuity of it all was both reassuring and overwhelming. Charlotte gasped quietly at the sight of the crown, its jewels sparkling magnificently in the abbey's lighting. She had seen pictures of the crown jewels before, had even viewed them behind thick glass in the Tower of London. But seeing the crown actually placed on her grandfather's head made it seem magical and real at the same time. She leaned toward her mother and whispered a question about the crown, and Kate answered quietly, explaining some of the history in simple terms her daughter could understand. Louis had looked up from his book at the sound of trumpets and the congregation's movement. Seeing his grandfather now wearing a crown and holding a scepter, he seemed impressed in a way he hadn't been before. For a 5-year-old, the abstract concept of kingship was difficult to grasp, but a crown and scepter were concrete, visible symbols of authority that made sense to his young mind. He watched with renewed interest, at least for the moment, as the ceremony continued. The Archbishop called upon those present to pay homage to their new king. William stood, his moment to publicly pledge his loyalty having arrived. As the heir to the throne, his oath carried special significance. He approached his father with measured steps, aware that cameras were capturing every moment and that his words would be analyzed and remembered. Kneeling before King Charles, William spoke the words of homage clearly and firmly, his voice carrying throughout the abbey. It was a son pledging loyalty to his father, but also a future king acknowledging his current sovereign. The dual nature of their relationship made the moment particularly poignant. Kate watched her husband with pride and emotion, understanding better than most the complex feelings this moment must evoke in him. William had always been close to his father, despite the challenges and scrutiny their family had faced over the years. This public declaration of support and loyalty represented not just protocol but genuine familial love and respect. When William returned to his seat beside her, she could see the emotion in his eyes, and she placed her hand on his arm in silent support. The congregation then joined in acclamation, their voices rising together in a show of unity and acceptance. The sound filled the abbey, echoing off ancient stone walls and creating a moment of collective participation that transformed the ceremony from a ritual observed into an experience shared. Even Louis seemed moved by the power of all those voices joined together, and he looked around with wide eyes at the sea of people all focused on his grandfather. Music swelled again as the ceremony moved into its next phase, with hymns that had been carefully selected to reflect both tradition and contemporary values. The choir's performance was flawless, the result of countless hours of practice. The music provided emotional peaks and valleys throughout the long ceremony, offering moments of reflection and celebration that helped maintain the congregation's engagement through several hours of ritual and solemnity. As various dignitaries and representatives from Commonwealth nations presented gifts and greetings, the global nature of the monarchy became evident. People from diverse cultures and backgrounds came forward, each bringing their own traditions and perspectives to this ancient British ceremony. It was a reminder that the monarchy had evolved from a purely British institution into something that represented and connected people across vast geographical and cultural distances. George paid particular attention to the representatives from different Commonwealth nations. He had been learning about these countries in his lessons, studying their histories and their relationships with Britain. Seeing actual people from these nations participating in his grandfather's coronation made his lessons come alive in a way textbooks never could. He made a mental note to ask his tutor more questions about some of the countries he saw represented today. The ceremony included moments of pageantry that delighted Charlotte. Military officers in elaborate uniforms performed precise movements with their ceremonial swords. Pages in historical costume assisted with the various ritual elements. The combination of solemnity and spectacle created an atmosphere that felt almost otherworldly, as if they had stepped back in time to an age when such ceremonies were the primary way nations expressed their identity and values. Kate used the quieter moments to check on Louis, ensuring he was managing the length of the ceremony without becoming too restless or disruptive. She had prepared for this day knowing that keeping a 5-year-old engaged through hours of formal ritual would be challenging. The small book helped, as did occasional quiet words of encouragement and explanation. She wanted Louis to remember this day positively, not as an ordeal he had to endure, but as a special family moment he had been privileged to witness. The ceremony's religious elements emphasized the moral and ethical dimensions of monarchy. Prayers were offered for wisdom, justice, and compassion in leadership. Readings from Scripture highlighted themes of service and responsibility to others. These spiritual components reminded everyone that the monarchy, despite all its wealth and pageantry, was meant to be grounded in values that transcended material power and privilege. King Charles listened to these prayers and readings with evident sincerity, his expression reflecting the seriousness with which he took these vows and commitments. As the ceremony progressed toward its conclusion, there was a sense of anticipation building throughout the abbey. The moment was approaching when King Charles would process back down the aisle, now fully crowned and anointed as monarch. The transformation from prince to king would be complete, and a new era in British history would officially begin. William felt the weight of this transition perhaps more keenly than anyone else in the abbey except his father, knowing that it moved him one step closer to his own future destiny. The final hymn began, its triumphant notes signaling the ceremony's conclusion. The entire congregation stood once more, their voices joining with the choir in a powerful expression of celebration and unity. Charlotte sang along to the parts she knew, her clear young voice blending with those around her. Even Louis seemed caught up in the moment, standing on his seat to see better, which Kate allowed given that the ceremony was nearly over, and his enthusiasm was harmless and rather endearing. King Charles rose from the coronation chair, now fully invested with all the symbols and authority of his office. The imperial state crown sat upon his head, slightly different from the St. Edward's crown used for the actual crowning, but equally magnificent, with its hundreds of precious stones including the famous Cullinan II diamond. He held the sovereign's scepter in his right hand and the sovereign's orb in his left, objects that had been held by monarchs for generations. Despite the weight of these items, both physical and symbolic, he carried himself with dignity and grace. The procession out of Westminster Abbey began, led by clergy, and followed by the newly crowned king. Queen Camilla walked beside him, wearing her own crown and ceremonial robes. Behind them came the immediate royal family, with William and Kate following with their children. This was another highly photographed moment, and the family moved with practiced coordination. George maintained his serious demeanor. Charlotte smiled and waved at people she recognized, and Louis alternated between walking properly and wanting to rush ahead, kept in check by his mother's gentle but firm guidance. Stepping out of the abbey into the daylight felt like emerging into another world. The crowd's roar was deafening, a wall of sound that seemed to hit them physically. Tens of thousands of people packed every available space, waving flags and cheering with unrestrained joy. The noise was so intense that normal conversation was impossible. William leaned down to say something to George, but had to nearly shout to be heard even at close range. The newly crowned King Charles and Queen Camilla entered the Gold State coach, a magnificent vehicle that had been used for coronation since 1762. Its ornate decorations gleamed in the sunlight, and the horses that would pull it were perfectly trained and groomed. William and Kate, with their children, entered a separate carriage, one that, while less elaborate than the Gold State coach, was still a beautiful example of royal transportation. The children pressed against the windows immediately, eager to wave at the crowds and see everything happening around them. The procession through London began, moving at a stately pace that allowed the massive crowds to see the royal family clearly. Military bands played rousing music, their precision and coordination the result of months of practice. Soldiers in ceremonial dress lined the route, their presence adding to the visual spectacle while also providing security. Overhead, helicopters circled, capturing aerial footage that would be watched by billions of people around the world. Inside the carriage, the Wales family experienced a mixture of relief that the ceremony was over and excitement about the celebration still to come. William loosened his collar slightly, grateful for a moment of relative privacy despite being surrounded by crowds. Kate removed her formal hat, which had begun to feel heavy after hours of wear. The children's energy, which had been suppressed during the ceremony, now bubbled over as they waved enthusiastically at everyone they passed. George noticed how people's faces lit up when they saw the royal family, their joy and excitement evident even from a distance. It gave him a different perspective on the role he would one day assume. These people weren't just fulfilling an obligation by attending. They genuinely cared about the monarchy and what it represented. Their enthusiasm was real and infectious, making him feel proud to be part of something that brought happiness to so many people. Charlotte kept up her own running commentary, pointing out creative signs people held, and particularly elaborate costumes she spotted in the crowd. One person had dressed as a giant crown, another wore a Union Jack suit that sparkled in the sunlight. The creativity and effort people had put into celebrating this day impressed her. She understood that while her family was at the center of the celebration, it truly belonged to all these people who had come together to mark this historic occasion. Louis waved so enthusiastically that he nearly knocked off his own formal cap, causing his parents to laugh despite the formal nature of the procession. His unfiltered joy and energy were impossible to contain, and the crowds responded to his enthusiasm with even louder cheers. In many ways, Louis represented the future of the monarchy, a generation that would need to balance tradition with authenticity and find ways to remain relevant in a rapidly changing world. The procession route took them past landmarks that represented different eras of British history. Medieval churches stood near modern office buildings. Ancient monuments shared space with contemporary architecture. It was a visual reminder that the monarchy itself existed in this same space between past and future, honoring traditions while adapting to new realities. The crowds represented this diversity too, with people of all ages and backgrounds coming together in celebration. As they approached Buckingham Palace, the crowd density increased even more. People had been waiting here for hours, some since the night before, to secure the best viewing positions for the palace balcony appearance that would follow. The famous facade of Buckingham Palace came into view, its flags flying and its guards standing at attention. This building had been the official London residence of British monarchs since 1837, and it remained one of the most recognizable buildings in the world. The carriages passed through the palace gates into the inner courtyard, finally providing the royal family with a break from the constant public scrutiny. William helped the children out of the carriage, and they all hurried inside to prepare for the balcony appearance. There was just enough time for quick refreshments and final adjustments to their appearance before they would need to face the crowds again. Inside the palace, staff moved efficiently to ensure everything was ready for the balcony moment. This brief appearance, lasting only a few minutes, would be watched by more people than had seen the entire coronation ceremony. It represented the moment when the newly crowned king would present himself to his people from the iconic balcony, a tradition that had been part of major royal events for generations. Kate used the short break to check on the children, making sure they had water and that their formal clothing hadn't become too uncomfortable. She smoothed down Charlotte's hair, which had become slightly disheveled during the carriage ride. She checked that George's collar was straight and that Louis's shirt remained tucked in. These small maternal gestures grounded her, reminding her that despite the historic significance of the day, she was still a mother caring for her children. William spoke with palace staff about the timing for the balcony appearance, ensuring they knew exactly when to step out and how long to remain visible to the crowds. Every detail mattered when billions of people were watching. He also checked in with his father, offering words of congratulation and support. The relationship between father and son had deepened over the years, strengthened by shared experiences and mutual understanding of the unique pressures they faced. The moment arrived to step onto the famous Buckingham Palace balcony. The sound of the crowd outside was audible even from inside the palace, a constant roar of anticipation and excitement. King Charles led the way with Queen Camilla at his side, followed by the core members of the royal family. William held Louis's hand firmly, knowing his youngest son's tendency to do unexpected things at crucial moments. Kate walked with Charlotte while George walked independently, his posture reflecting the responsibility he felt. As they stepped through the tall doors onto the balcony, the crowd's roar intensified to an almost unbelievable volume. The view was breathtaking, with people packed into every available space as far as the eye could see. The mall stretched out before them, a sea of red, white, and blue as British flags waved in celebration. The sheer number of people who had gathered was overwhelming, a physical manifestation of the public's connection to the monarchy. King Charles stepped forward first, acknowledging the crowd with waves and smiles. The response was immediate and enthusiastic, with cheers echoing off the palace facade. Queen Camilla joined him, and together they represented the new era of the British monarchy. Behind them, William and Kate positioned themselves with their children, creating a family tableau that photographers around the world captured from every possible angle. George stood tall, remembering all the coaching he had received about posture and presentation. He waved at the crowd with a motion that was becoming more natural with practice. Being on this balcony at this historic moment gave him a glimpse of his future. The attention was intense, but there was also something exhilarating about being part of an event that brought so much joy to so many people. He glanced at his father, who gave him an encouraging nod, and George felt a surge of confidence. Charlotte waved enthusiastically, her natural charm evident in every gesture. She had worried about this moment during preparations, concerned about doing something wrong or embarrassing herself on such a public stage. But now that she was actually here, she found herself enjoying it. The crowd's energy was contagious, and their obvious happiness made her feel like she was part of something truly special. She noticed children in the crowd waving at her specifically, and she made sure to wave back, creating small moments of connection. Louis, predictably, stole much of the attention with his animated reactions. His face showed every emotion clearly, from wonder at the enormous crowd to delight at the noise they made. At one point, he covered his ears because of the volume, a gesture so natural and childlike that it endeared him to millions watching around the world. Kate kept a gentle hand on his shoulder, guiding him subtly while allowing him to be himself. She had learned that trying to make Louis conform to rigid expectations was less effective than working with his natural personality. The family stood together for several minutes, allowing photographers and the public to take in the scene. This image would appear on front pages globally, becoming one of the defining photographs of the coronation. It showed a monarchy that was both traditional and contemporary, rooted in history but also representing a modern family that people could relate to. The balance was delicate, but in this moment, it seemed to work perfectly. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for, the flypast by the Royal Air Force. The sound of approaching aircraft could be heard before they came into view, a growing rumble that added to the excitement. The family looked up along with everyone in the crowd as historic aircraft appeared in formation overhead. Spitfires and Hurricanes from World War II flew alongside modern fighter jets, representing the continuity of British military tradition and capability. Louis's eyes went wide with excitement at the sight of the aircraft. He pointed enthusiastically and tried to count them, though they moved too quickly for accurate counting. The planes flew in precise formation, their pilots having practiced for weeks to ensure perfection. Colored smoke trails streamed behind them in red, white, and blue, creating the Union Jack flag in the sky above Buckingham Palace. The crowd's cheers reached new heights, and even the royal family seemed caught up in the spectacle. Charlotte watched in fascination as the aircraft performed their routine, the precision and coordination impressive even to her young eyes. She asked her mother questions about the different types of planes, and Kate answered as best she could, though the noise made conversation difficult. The moment represented something larger than just an air show. It was a demonstration of national pride and military excellence, a reminder of Britain's history and its continued place in the world. George understood the symbolism more deeply than his younger siblings. His tutors had taught him about Britain's military history, including the crucial role of the Royal Air Force in defending the nation during its darkest hours. Seeing these aircraft fly over his grandfather's coronation connected past and present in a tangible way. It reminded him that being royal meant being connected to the nation's entire history, not just its ceremonial aspects. As the last aircraft disappeared from view, the family waved one final time before retreating back into the palace. The public appearance had lasted only a few minutes, but those minutes would be replayed and analyzed for years to come. Every gesture, every expression, every interaction would be discussed and interpreted. It was the nature of royal life, something William and Kate had learned to accept, though they still tried to shield their children from the most intrusive aspects of public scrutiny. Inside the palace, the atmosphere became more relaxed as the most public aspects of the day concluded. The children were finally allowed to remove their formal clothing and change into more comfortable attire. Louis immediately became more energetic without the constraint of his formal outfit, racing through the palace corridors in a way that made his parents smile despite gentle admonitions about proper behavior. Charlotte carefully hung up her formal dress, already thinking about the day when she might wear something similar at an equally important event. The family gathered for a private celebration, joined by close relatives and friends. The formality of the day gave way to genuine family warmth and connection. King Charles, still wearing his crown but having removed the heaviest ceremonial robes, looked tired but genuinely happy. He had waited his entire life for this day, and now that it had arrived and gone well, there was a sense of relief mixed with accomplishment. William reflected on the day's events, thinking about how everything had unfolded. The ceremony had been beautiful, the public response overwhelmingly positive, and his children had performed admirably despite the pressure and length of the occasion. But more than the specific events, he thought about what the day represented. It was a marker of change, a passing of generational responsibility, and a reminder of the continuity that defined the monarchy. Kate watched her children interact with their grandfather, now officially the king, and felt grateful that despite all the formality and public scrutiny, they had managed to maintain genuine family relationships. Her children knew King Charles not just as a monarch, but as a loving grandfather who played with them and told them stories. That balance between public role and private family was something she and William worked hard to maintain. As evening fell over London, the celebrations continued throughout the city. Parties and gatherings brought people together, strangers becoming friends through shared experience of this historic day. The Wales family, having fulfilled their public duties, could finally relax and simply be a family. Tomorrow would bring new responsibilities and expectations, but tonight belonged to them, a private celebration of a very public day that would be remembered throughout history.